Hey, it's Scott Petrak with another episode of the Brown Zone Coverage Podcast. After a week off, we're back. The Browns sent a large contingent to Indianapolis for the scouting combine, and I also made the trip. We talked to General Manager Andrew Berry, Coach Kevin Stefanski, and others. Here to discuss, as always, is Dave Chudowsky of WKYC Morning News. How's it going, Chud?
Scott, it's going well. I actually enjoyed my week off last week. You gave me the week off, but sure enough, the text came this week, and I'm like, well, there's that guy in Indy having fun, going out to dinner, pretending to work. No, I'm kidding. I know that you're, I know you're putting in a ton of hours there, but needless to say, though, still, it's kind of a little bit different than the normal day-to-day routine, right? Getting out there and mingling with the NFL world.
Oh yeah, it's completely different, right? And it kind of kicks off the off season. I know there's the Shrine Game and the Senior Bowl, but to me, this feels like the start of draft season. Feels like the start of the free agent season, right? Because we're less than 2 weeks away now from the start of the league year and when teams can sign free agents. And it's died down a little bit. I think from its heyday, the combine. Some coaches don't come, but the Browns sent a bunch of people here, like I mentioned. You walk around Indy, and it's a lot of NFL people. It's a lot of draft prospects, right? A lot of big dudes walking around in sweatsuits. So I think it's really valuable, and just to see people and talk to people, whether it's people from the NFL or people who used to be in the NFL or just media from around the league.
Mm. Okay, so Andrew Berry spoke on Tuesday. Kevin Stefanski spoke yesterday. Quickly, just give me and the listeners kind of a map of how the combine works, like what day it starts, because it goes through this week and into early next week, right?
Yeah, it's staggered. So the coaches and GMs who talked mainly talked Tuesday and Wednesday. So Andrew Berry was Tuesday, Kevin Stefanski was Wednesday. And then the players began to talk, the draft prospects began to talk Wednesday, and it was defensive linemen. So I talked to some defensive linemen. The Browns are likely going to be interested in defensive linemen. So talk to some of those guys, listen to some of those guys. And that'll continue where today I think it's linebacker or defensive backs and tight ends, and then you get to receivers and quarterbacks and throughout the positions. And then today is where, and they moved it later in the day. So I think I don't know if it starts in the late afternoon or tonight. Um, the players start to work out. So it's the first people that talk, then the next day they work out for teams. So tonight it'll be the defensive linemen. And throughout the whole time, the coach or the teams, right? Whether it's GMs, coaching staff, scouting staff, they meet with players at night, right? And they can run into them during the day and have informal meetings. You see guys in hotels, but they set up formal meetings inside Lucas Oil Stadium, and it's like 15-minute interviews. And each team has a loge or suite in the stadium, and the player comes in and sits down with whoever is there for the team, and they conduct formal interviews, and it's the first time that most of these teams or most of these players from teams get to sit down with these prospects.
But not all prospects go.
Correct. They invite, I want to say the top 320, 330. And then, you get to decide if you want. So there's guys that come to who aren't invited to the combine to get drafted. Obviously, there's undrafted guys that wind up playing in the league. And then even if you're picked to come to the combine, it's up to you whether you work out. I think Marvin Harrison Jr. is not working out. Some guys don't run, some guys do some things. That's kind of evolved a little bit. But it's still, it's a good place to get medically checked. That's one of the big things. That's kind of why the combine started.
Mhm.
So all the teams get the medical information. But I would say for the most part, everybody, most of the guys work out, and pretty much everyone meets with a large number of teams.
So it's good because the beat writers and then the fans get the information from you from this team. So you have the Browns contingent there. So it's good in that regard. Then it's good because the media can talk with the players, and then the there's the workouts. So you get to learn about the guys in many ways. You get to meet them, and then you get to watch them. So the players talk one day and then work out the next.
Exactly. And I always find it valuable to get your eyes on a guy, whether it's working out, which I've gone to the stadium and watched, the quarterbacks and receivers throw and catch, done that a couple times, or just the interview part. And you get to, first of all, you get a feel for how smart a guy is and how he comes off. but you also get a feel for how big a guy is. And to me, that's important, Chud. And, obviously a lot goes into what makes a prospect a good player, but I always like kind of bodying up to a guy, right? When there's a Browns are drafting quarterbacks, okay, is Baker really this tall? Johnny's only this big, or whatever. And just for a quick example, we talked to Mason Smith. He's a D tackle out of LSU, and this dude is a big guy. And he's like, all the defensive tackles are kind of talking at the same time, or 10 of them are talking at the same time. And he's next to Chris Jenkins from Michigan, and they're both, I think they're both candidates for the Browns at 54, and Jenkins might be 6 inches smaller, right? Now they both play D tackle. They both do it different ways. They're both, good players in college. Jenkins' dad played in the NFL, Chris Jenkins. But he's just different. He's got some Calais Campbell in him. So it's okay. Do you like that kind of guy, right? And I know he talked to the Browns this week, and you can read as much as you want into that because they meet with a bunch of players. But he said he had a good interview. He's an interesting guy, interesting story, and physically, I was impressed with him.
All right, we can talk about a few other players a little bit later on, but I think the highlight, at least for us here, and number one, the reason I wanted to do that is for anyone that hasn't been to the combine before, or maybe hears the combine, I just wanted everyone to kind of have an idea from your eyes of what happens there.
Sure.
And go through the process. So I thought that was kind of important, but I think what we're going to really dive in here today more so is the headlines from the Browns and what we learned from Barry and Stefanski. And I think the first thing we're going to start with is Deshaun Watson. And we got an update that he'll begin throwing in March. And he's coming along well in his rehab. Those are kind of the highlights I saw. And that Stefanski and Dorsey are going to go out and meet with him out. Is that in California, Scott?
Yeah, Deshaun Watson's still in LA. That's where he had the shoulder surgery on November 21st. That's where he's done his rehab. So they're going to go out and meet him. I don't know if it's this morning or yesterday, Watson posted on social media, him back at UCLA. That's where the latest step of his rehab has been. He's been in the gym, hasn't thrown yet. Took a vacation. He was in Italy for a while, but he's back in LA working out. And Kevin Stefanski and Ken Dorsey are going to go out there. And I'm pretty sure it's the first time Dorsey and Watson will meet face to face since he's gotten the job, right? I know they talked and texted, but they're going to go out. It's informal because once in this kind of dead period, you're not allowed to have informal meetings. They're not allowed to work him out. I don't even think they can watch film together, but they can meet. They can talk big picture things, and it's important for those guys to meet. And that's the angle I took in my story was. We've talked about it. All this offseason is all about this next season. It's getting Deshaun Watson right? And getting him to be the guy you think he can be and why you traded for him. And part of that will be the relationship he has with Ken Dorsey because Browns don't have a specific quarterback coach. So Dorsey's going to handle that, and he's the coordinator. So it's a lot about those two guys working together, and this is the next step in that progression. And Dorsey was clear in his introductory news conference that it's about getting Deshaun Watson back to that elite level, and this is, I think, an important step in that progression. And then you mentioned the progress, and when he starts throwing, that's the biggest thing, right? I mean, for Watson to even have a chance to become to return to the player that he used to be, is a shoulder okay, and the Browns are confident, continue to say how confident they are that he'll be fine and the shoulder will be fine. But you need to see him throw it, right? I mean, that's huge. It's the shoulder. He had the rotator cuff, which they say was fine, and then he had the broken bone in there. So that's step number one is get on the field, throw the ball, and if everything goes right and it's pain-free or whenever it's supposed to be pain-free, then you start the offseason program with the Browns in mid-April, and you're ready to go.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of a bummer that, you're relying on this guy you're paying all this money for, and he hasn't even been able to throw. I mean, it just kind of is like, oh my gosh, we're relying on this guy, and he's just going to start throwing in March.
Yeah, I'm with you. And to me, it's a lot of uncertainty, right, surrounding him. Right. And there has been since the Browns got him, right? There was the lingering, is he going to be suspended? How long is he going to be suspended? Last year, it felt like that was behind him, and then he gets hurt in week 3. Then gets hurt again, a month later, or month and a half later in Baltimore. It's done for the season. So it's never been able to settle in. And, obviously, you never know when an injury is going to pop up. But now the question is the arm going to be okay? And, guys have injuries. Joe Burrow's coming off a wrist injury, right? Anthony Richardson in Indianapolis is coming off an injury. Like, guys get hurt, guys come back, they rehab, they turn out to be okay. The thing with Watson is it's a shoulder, it's a throwing shoulder. It's an unusual injury for a quarterback. And, broken bone, they tend to heal, right? And you would think that everything's okay. But, there's a lot of stuff in your shoulder, So we just don't know for certain. The Browns are confident. Like, they continue to be not over the top, but abundantly confident that he's going to be okay. But that's an injury that you just have to keep monitoring. And I'm hoping that he posts videos of him throwing on social media so you get a look of it, right? And then because we're not, I don't think I think the first time I would probably get to see him throw would be OTAs in May. So I can't wait to see that, because that's going to be a huge sign of, if he's throwing the ball like normal, then it's okay. You can kind of put that to the back burner, right? Then it's just a matter of, can he stay healthy? But you got to get healthy to stay healthy. And that's going to be, in my mind, the biggest story involving Deshaun Watson for the next X number of months, until we see that, okay, he can throw it 100% as many times as he used to, right? As hard and as often as he used to.
Barry and Stefanski both fielded a lot of questions about offensive coordinator. Obviously, and we've mentioned this, that we're going to be talking about this all the time. So we're going to continue to talk about it. But obviously, who's going to call the plays? That came up yesterday, right?
It did. And it didn't. Stefanski, no answer, says, I don't think it's important that we have it figured out right now, which I'm sure he's right? We're months away from that being an issue, but it's still a question. We still want to know. It's still, to me, it's important. And I think Kevin Stefanski thinks it's important. If not, he wouldn't call the plays, right? Like, if he didn't think it was a big deal, he wouldn't have called the plays for 4 years. So it's important to ask. And I'm not in my mentions all the time on Twitter, but I had a guy like, when are you guys going to quit asking that? And the answer is when they give us an answer, right?
Yeah,
like,
never.
When we know the answer to the question, that's when we're going to quit asking it.
Right. Yeah.
So, it's important to know. Stefanski did say he stressed how he and Ken Dorsey are on the same page, and not only on the same page, he said they see the game exactly the same. I think that's a quote. So obviously you need that in a head coaching coordinator, especially when Kevin is so involved in the offense. I don't know if that leads to then Kevin Stefanski turning the play calling duties over to Ken Dorsey, because they do see it the same way, or hey, I still feel I'm the best guy to do this. We've done it this way forever. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. But to me, a takeaway was all these new voices, right? Because it wasn't just a change of coordinator. It was a change of tight ends coach, running back coach. The O-line coach changed because Bill Callahan left to be with his son. And Stefanski said he did want new voices. And he looked for guys who had experience in different schemes. For instance, Tommy Rees, he said, yeah, we wanted a guy who'd been in college. And Tommy Rees was coordinator at Notre Dame in Alabama, and now he's going to be tight ends coach and pass game specialist. And that's maybe a area where the Browns didn't have a whole lot of experience on their staff, and now they do.
All right. If we would have recorded this, and we're recording this Thursday morning, if we were recorded this 2 days ago, I probably would have hit you with Nick Chubb a lot earlier. Yeah. But that's a huge storyline from this week. First of all, before we get into what you learned while you were there, had we done a podcast last week, we would have probably talked about all the rumors out there. Can you just bring people up to speed on the Nick Chubb rumors?
Yeah, that's a great question, Chuck. There's a lot of I'm stumbling over it myself here. Nick Chubb has a cap hit of $15 million, $15+ million for 2024. The Browns are not going to keep his contract there where that number is going to be taken out. They're not going to use that much of the salary cap on Nick Chubb coming off 2 knee surgeries and uncertain of when he will play again, right? That just makes sense. And the reality is, even if he was healthy, they probably wouldn't have him with that kind of salary cap number either. They would rework the contract and probably add a bunch of years at the end and give him more money, right? Like that's not super sustainable, especially for the way the Browns structure their contract, probably how much they value running back. So his contract needs to be done. And the injuries in the surgeries make it mandatory that they do it, right? It just doesn't make any sense to have Nick Chubb take that kind of cap, to give you that kind of cap hit. So they're going to have to restructure. And I think people on the outside look at the number and go, well, okay, he's a candidate to be cut because they could save this kind of money, right? And I think they'd only have $4 million dead cap hit. So if you don't know Nick Chubb's relationship with the team and how much the team values Nick Chubb, it's an easy thing to look at and say, well, they could cut Nick Chubb. I don't think they're going to cut Nick Chubb. Andrew Berry said they don't want to cut Nick Chubb, right? That they don't want his last carry to be the one where his knee gets wrecked in Pittsburgh. Right? He's clear about that in January after the season, and nothing has changed. Now they still need to work out a restructure with Nick Chubb and Nick Chubb's agent, and Chubb has to agree to do that, right? He doesn't have to. He could say, no, pay me what you're going to pay me, and then we'd have a story, right? But Nick Chubb, I would assume, understands that he doesn't have a whole lot of leverage here, right? Because nobody knows when he's going to play again. Nobody knows if he's going to be the same player, right? I don't think he's going to be ready for the start of camp. Certainly, week 1 is in jeopardy, right? The Browns have said he'll return at some point in the 2024 season. So Nick Chubb doesn't have a whole lot of leverage, right? Even if he said, no, cut me, he's going to go on the market. He's not going to get a huge deal, right? Because no team's going to line up to pay a running back with two, and this is the second time his left knee's been messed up, right? So I feel like it's a situation where the Browns want this to work, Nick Chubb will want this to work, and they'll figure out a way to restructure the deal that significantly lowers the salary cap hit and gives Chubb the opportunity to earn back, if not all, a chunk of the salary in incentives, right? Which only makes sense. That's fair to both sides. This discussion, I think, would be a lot more interesting if Chubb had been healthy, is still healthy, and had another monster year, because then the Browns would be in position of, okay, we saw what happened last year, right, where the running backs complained about not getting paid. Would they reinvest in Nick Chubb for a second extension? That would be interesting. But now I think it's about, okay, you sign him to a 1-year deal with a bunch of incentives, you lower the cap number, and make it work to see how he can perform in 2024. That's how I think it'll play out. But I understand, so I understand where all the smoke is, but I don't think there's a lot of fire there, just given the fact the Browns, they respect Nick Chubb so much. And I think he likes being here. And they both sides want to make this work is how I see it. And just yesterday, quick example. I mean, 2 days ago, Andrew Berry called Nick Chubb a 1 in a billion running back. Yesterday, Kevin Stefanski was asked a question he was talking about bad body language. And somebody said, well, who gets fined the least for that? And he goes, well, it's probably Nick Chubb. He goes, but Nick Chubb's the answer to all those questions. So he's held up on this pedestal, or put on this pedestal, as the prime example of what the team wants their players to be. And they're not looking to move on from it.
Repeat that again. 15 million. He has what's left on his deal?
No, that's what, and I'm not an expert, but there's salary cap hits, right? So I think his salary is 12 or 14, but the way the contract's structured, a lot of times the back end of the contract, it's a bigger hit against the salary cap. So
how long is this contract right now?
This is the end. This is the last year.
This is it. This is the last year. So, but couldn't Chubb say, well, hey, wait a minute. I mean, this is the contract I signed. It's not my fault I got hurt. Or is it because the way the NFL works is they can cut you at any time and you don't get the full salary? How does that work, Scott?
Yeah, each contract's different, right? But usually what happens is it's front loaded. So by the time you get to the end of it, there's chances to get out of it for the team. And, so that's why you hear, he signed a 5-year, $100 million deal with 60 guaranteed, right? And then, so the guaranteed money is the key. And that, for an example, if it's 5 for 100, 60 guaranteed, that means there's probably an out after the 3rd year where the team can move on without taking a huge cap hit, right? So I'm looking at, and you go to Spotrac, I don't know if it's Spot Rack or Spotrac, but it's a good contract site, right? So Chubb's salary this year is $11.7 million, and $1 million option, but the cap hit would be $15.825 million. So he would get, let's say he has roster bonus, so he's getting about $13 million in cash, or $12.2 million in cash, but his salary cap number is bigger. It's almost $16 million. So the Browns, this would be an opportunity where the Browns say, hey, this is the time to move on from Chubb. Now, if Chubb were, the same, if he hadn't had the injury, then it's a legitimate discussion. Would they just pay him and take the $60 million cap hit because he's such a good player? Or would they say, no, we can't do that and let him hit the market? And Chubb, it's interesting. When we talked to Chubb last year during training camp, he talked about how he doesn't know if what's going to happen to his contract, right? And that was the whole where the running backs were meeting and they wanted more money.
That's right.
Right, the devaluation of the position. And it might have been as good an interview as Nick Chubb's ever done. He was so honest and open and talked about how, he thinks running backs should get paid. But during that interview, he admitted that his contract situation was going to be interesting in this offseason. Like, he saw it coming. He goes, I don't know if I'll be back, right? I don't know what's going to happen, but the injury changes that. So, yes, Chud, because he's under contract, he is completely in his right to say, pay me or cut me. And if he said that, I think the Browns would cut him because they're not going to they're not going to take the $16 million cap hit, which, either way they have $4 million, but they save $12 million in cap space, right? They're not going to take that for a guy that they don't know if and when he's going to play. So
if they cut him, does he get anything?
No, he would have gotten he would have gotten all the other money he'd made, right?
Right.
But he would not get the $12.2 million, right?
Yeah, that's what I mean. Yeah,
he would not get that cash. No, he would not.
Okay. And
right?
and the thing that makes this difficult, and you mentioned this, but I just want to go over it again, is that, when you say Andrew Berry says 1 in a million, 1 in a billion guy, he was that. The problem is you don't know if he's going to be that now.
Well, that's exactly right. You just don't know, right? And I know he's going to work crazy hard, right? Like, there's no doubt about that. And he's going to, and the hope is, and you saw him come back from the injury in Georgia, which was severe. So that's the hope, but there's no way to know that, right? You don't know that with an ACL, let alone an ACL and an MCL, and he had other damage inside the knee at this stage of his career. The second time the left knee's been messed up, right? So there's a lot of questions. And even if they think Nick Chubb's going to be the player was going to be, you have to rework the deal anyway, right? Like, because he's not going to be that player to start 2024. So it's a harsh reality of the business, but the backdrop is that he's not going to get this kind of money somewhere else, right? It's nobody's going to pay him $12 million to play this year. Like that, I don't care how good he is. Like, it just doesn't make any sense. So that's why I think both teams will work it out, because I don't think Nick Chubb has the leverage to say, you honor my contract, right? Like, I just don't think I just don't think that's the reality of the situation. Now I could be wrong, and he could try to play hardball, but that, to me, that just doesn't it's just not reality,
All right, Scott, coming out of the Chubb deal, let's stick with money. And we got some news this week on the salary cap, right? And then, from there, Denzel Ward. So plenty to discuss in that area.
Yeah, the salary cap jumped $30 million, which is a record, from year to year. It's up to $255.4 million. So it's interesting, Chad, because your initial reaction, I say that really helps the Browns, right? Because the Browns were just about $8 million under the cap, or I'm sorry, over the cap. And they have to be under the cap by the start of the league year, March 13th. So even with the $30 million, they were $8 million over. And then I got a couple things here. So yesterday, we're taping this Thursday morning. I'm still in Indy. On Wednesday, or actually they did Tuesday, found out about it Wednesday morning. They restructured Denzel Ward's contract, and he had a cap hit. It was supposed to have a cap hit of like $23.5 million, and they saved themselves over $11 million, I want to say. So now they're under the cap, so the cap compliant, so they don't have to do anything crazy before the start of the league year. Now, what's next is free agency, right? So they got to clear more money to sign free agents, but they have Deshaun Watson's contract. He's got a $64 million cap hit, so they can play around with that. Amari Cooper's got like a $20 million cap hit, so they can play around with that. We mentioned Chubb, so there's room for them. And they saved Ward. They cleared $11.35 million for Ward. So they have room to play with, and Andrew Berry is always confident they are ahead of the curve and they can manipulate the salary cap. to create enough room to sign whoever they want to sign. So that shouldn't be a problem. But the bigger picture thing is, with all this extra money, like you think, oh, okay, help the Browns. It's easy for them to get under the cap, and that's true. But it also gives all this extra money to the rest of the league, right? So if you're competing, let's say you're competing for free agent X. Well, now team Y also has $30 extra million, right? So that's more money. You would assume the free agents are going to get more money because of this. So I don't know if it necessarily helps the Browns. I think in some ways it does. In some ways it could even be a disadvantage because there's more cash out there, or not cash, more salary cap room for teams to spend. And the Browns feel like they're ahead of the curve on that. That they're not ahead of the curve, that they're at the top of the league in managing the salary cap. So they might even think that they're, almost better off with a tighter window because they can handle it better, right? And kind of win on the margins, where if everybody's flushing salary cap space, then everybody kind of wins, if that makes any sense. So I just think it's an interesting thing. It just, the bottom line is the NFL is making a ton of money, right? Because the salary cap is based on revenue, and a percentage of the revenue goes to the salary cap. It's 48 or 49%. And I think there's also a bump because teams had to put aside money for during COVID. The salary cap dipped during COVID, and there was it had to kind of bounce back out. But yeah, so those are the kind of the highlights from the salary cap stuff.
Sure. And again, Denzel Ward, and when these contracts get restructured, they're going to get their money. It's just at a different time, or it's just how it's restructured.
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, there could be a couple things. Either you transfer a bunch of the salary to a bonus, and then you could spread the bonus out over the rest of the contract, and that enables the team to spread the money over the cap, right over the years of the contract, to spread it over the salary cap. But Denzel Ward's still getting his money. He just might get it up front, right? They've done that plenty of times. You can also, when you do that, you can add dummy years to the end of the contract. Now, this could come back, it could be an issue down the road, and we see teams, the Rams, kind of wind up in salary cap hell, people like to say, because you keep deferring this money, so there's contracts the Browns have done where, the contract actually expires, for example, expires after 2025, but they have cap commitments to guys through 2027, right? So that's one way to maneuver it. But with the cap going up year by year, teams can do that and feel comfortable that they will have that room, right? It gets easier as the cap continues to climb. And I did think it was interesting. I asked Andrew Berry, with $30 million, it surprised a lot of people, at least, from reading the national media, and, oh my gosh, it's up $30 million. It's a record. He said that was within their projections, right? So when they're scoping out, could it possibly jump that much? They were not stunned by the fact that it jumped $30 million.
What's the latest with Zadarius Smith?
Yeah, to me, he's free agent number one, right? And they have a lot of free agents. Now, they don't have a lot of starters that are going to be free agents. And we could talk about free agency more, in a couple of weeks, right? We got another week before free agency, but I'm glad we're doing it because that's part of the combine experience. They have if you project it, theoretically, all 11 starters on offense are coming back. And whether that's Nick Chubb or Jerome Ford at running back, not that they can't find another starter, right? Like they could sign a starter or draft a starter at running back and have a new starter. But, Jerome Ford started at the end of the season for a bunch of games, right? Since starting in week 3, and he's coming back. And that's his case for the offense, right? They might go get a receiver to bump Elijah Moore down the depth chart, but Elijah Moore started a bunch of games and he's coming back, right? On defense, most of the starters are coming back with the exception of Zadarius Smith, scheduled to be a free agent, Jordan Elliott, the D tackle, scheduled to be free agent, and then linebackers Sione Takitaki and Anthony Walker Jr. are eligible for free agency. So, and then you have Joe Flacco, right? Who's kind of a different, I think he's probably the biggest name free agent, right? Joe Flacco, just for how that season finished. But even if he comes back, he'd be the backup. So it's a long way for me to say I think Zadarius Smith is the number one free agent that the Browns have. And it's interesting because when they traded for him last year, right? They traded for him from the Vikings. They redid his contract as part of the trade so that he would become a free agent after 2023 because there were more years left on his deal, but he wanted a chance to be a free agent. And obviously you want a chance to be a free agent because you want to chase the dollars, right? That's what it's about. And it was not shy about that. So it feels like he's going to want to test the market. It's not, I don't think he's going to take a hometown discount to stay with the Browns. I think he enjoyed his time here. I thought he had a productive season. The sack numbers weren't great. I think he had 5.5, and this is a guy that had double digits 3 out of the 4 previous years. But I thought he's still really good. Part of the number 1 ranked defense in the league, right? So I think he gets to free agency. I don't think a deal gets done before March 13th. And you can agree to deals starting on March 11th. But when he gets out there, if he finds that the market isn't as robust as he thinks, then he could come back to the Browns. So I think they have to have a couple plans here. They have to have contingency plans to me, he would be the perfect, they need a guy opposite Myles Garrett. They still have Obo Garankro and they have Alex Wright, but I think they need a starter ahead of those 2 guys. I think Obo's a great 3, Wright's a really good 4, but you need that number 2. And to me, Smith is probably the best option, especially if you can get him for a contract at 12 or 13 million a year, maybe 2 years for 26 million. To me, that's a sweet spot for the Browns. Now, maybe Smith can get more than that. And depending on the rankings you look at, I saw one ranking had him as the 9th highest rated free agent. And if that's the case, I think he gets more money than that. I don't think he wouldn't be in my top 10. So it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out, Chud. And I think the Browns might have to be a little patient there. Kind of how like they were Jadeveon Clowney a couple years ago. They waited, they signed him later in the free agent period. I don't think they'll wait that long with Smith, but I think they'll let him go out there and see what the market is. And then maybe they match, maybe they don't, maybe he gets a big deal somewhere else, and then they have to look to a different team or a different player to fill that defensive end spot. But to me, he's that guy. Like, Jordan Elliott, I expect to leave. I think they'll try to bring back Taki or Walker at linebacker. I don't think it's guaranteed. Walker's had the injuries. Taki, to me, would be he's the guy of the 2, and I like Anthony Walker a lot. But I think Taki's younger. He's been healthier. He's the guy I would try to retain, right? But it sounds
bring up the injuries, there.
Yeah, right. But it sounds like Taki's going to get to free agency, and then again see what the market is. Right now, maybe the Browns will get it done before then, but I haven't gotten that sense that they'll get it done before March, 11th or 13th there. So again, I think it's really interesting with Smith because we know that Jim Schwartz's defense is all about the front 4, right? And they rotate 8 or 9 guys. You need as many guys as you can sign up front, and it starts with Smith, and then it could be tackle. Like they could spend, I think it'll be interesting to see if their number 1 free agency commitment, and we can get into this more down the road, but I do think it's interesting. Will it be defensive end, defensive tackle, or wide receiver? I think they could go any of those 3 roads as far as who gets the most money this year in free agency. And I would lean against D-tackle because Dalvin Tomlinson got the most money last year in free agency. But you never know because they really value that defensive front, and they do need somebody next to Dalvin Tomlinson.
Yeah. Well, you led right into my next topic, and that was going to be free agency. And I agree. We'll get into that in the coming weeks, really break it down. But just true or false, quick answer, true or false.
Yep.
What the Browns do in the draft will kind of depend on what happens in free agency.
Yes, true.
Yes. Okay, true. All right. So you mentioned a bunch of the positions. So the Browns, their first pick is 54 in the 2nd round.
Yep.
I believe they have a total of 7 picks. Is that right?
It is.
3rd rounder, 2 5ths, 2 6ths, and a 7th. Is that right?
Yeah, it is. So so that means only 2 picks in the first 2 days, right?
Okay. All right. So we'll talk about free agent down the line, but knowing free agency is ahead before the draft, how does free agency and the draft kind of come into play for you while you're at the combine?
That's interesting. I think you're just trying to balance all the different scenarios, right? So if Zadarius Smith, for example, resigns, then you pay less attention to the defensive ends, right, in the draft. Not that they couldn't sign one, but it's unlikely, or couldn't draft one, but it's unlikely you sign Zadarius Smith for big money and draft the defensive end at number 54. And I think that works for all the positions, right? And and not that they couldn't, and they're almost at a point with the roster where it is draft best player, but that's always taken into consideration with the need, right? Need versus best player, that kind of thing. So it's that balance, and what also plays into it, Chud, is you look at the strengths of each, right? Like this is a really good receiver draft class. So how does that affect how you approach free agency, right? Like if you believe you can get a guy at 54 that can come in and have an impact, and the Browns have not shown the ability to draft that guy yet, right? Like this front office has not shown that ability. Anthony Schwartz was a miss. David Bell is just a guy, and the jury's still out on Cedric Tillman. So I don't think you can feel completely confident that if they drafted a guy at number 54, he'd come in and be gangbusters as a rookie. But there is that option. And if you knew, hey, we can get a really good guy at 54 that we really like a receiver, I think you're less inclined to spend big money on a T. Higgins or a Mike Evans or a Calvin Ridley, right? So I do think that plays into the overall approach, and all that's in play at the combine. Because the GMs talk to the agents, the GMs interview the draft prospects, right? They have these like parallel tracks of how I'm going to improve the roster this offseason. And here's the two ways: these free agents that start in March and the rookie or the draft picks that happen in April.
So if you're listening to this right now, we're not breaking any news. You've heard that the Browns will be practicing with the Vikings before preseason game. That's fresh news this week, right, Scott? That we learned at the combine.
It is, and real quick, it is weird there, Chud, because Andrew Berry, who doesn't just give up stuff, announced that Tuesday, but then Kevin Stefanski on Wednesday kind of said, we need the Vikings to confirm it. It's not 100% yet. So I'm sure it'll happen because Andrew Berry's not going to get out over his skis too much. But I just thought it was worth noting that Stefanski kind of walked it back just a hair. Like I completely expect it to happen, but I just wanted to say that.
Oh, okay. Now, did he walk that back? And so at the combine, you have Stefanski and Barry and guys from other teams. They'll go up to a podium.
Correct.
All right. So I was able to watch that, right? But then they have sidebars with you guys, right? The local media.
That's correct, sir.
Do you feel like you get more info in those sidebars?
I do. And part of that is because we save some of the questions, like maybe some of the better questions, so they don't go to everybody, right? And it is to a smaller group. And the other part of it is you're not fighting to get as many questions in because anybody can be at the podium, right? So, for instance, New England writers are asking about Alex Van Pelt. Tennessee writers are asking about Bill Callahan. When it's just a smaller group to the side, it's all Browns.
So is there anything from the smaller group that came out of this that we might not know or that you found to be very important that we haven't hit on yet?
I don't think so. I mean, it was a lot of follow-up, right? So Kevin Stefanski talked about returning to the Greenbrier at the
That was
podium,
my next question.
Right.
Yep.
So he talks about the podium. He talks about it more to the side. I'm doing a story. I'm hoping to write a story today about the changes to the staff and, looking for new ideas. And I think I might've mentioned that earlier, but looking for new ideas, looking for, the Tommy Rees with the college stuff. So we not pressed him, but we followed up to the side. So I don't know if there was any, I'll tell you what, though, I think the only quote unquote newsy part that came out of the side thing was the play call. I don't think he got that at the podium. I think he got that on the side. So yeah, there was nothing crazy. Like, if there were any big news you'd have heard about it, it wasn't like it's not off the record. It's on the record. It's just to a smaller group.
Sure. Yeah. So obviously people know about the Greenbrier. What I want to know is your thoughts on that. Or do you think that's a good thing to go back to the Greenbrier? Are you excited that they're going to do that again?
Well, I got a bunch of thoughts on that, Chud. Have you spent 10 days in the middle of West Virginia lately?
Yeah. I'm going to drive through it here coming up in a couple weeks.
Well, there you go. I had a good time at the Greenbrier last year. Like this is just personally, it was a good time. But it's a long time, right? It's a long time to be away from home. The accommodation, the media accommodations weren't great. Like we were in a tent. by a porta potty, right? Like, so there's some stuff that just from a personal like complaining perspective.
Right, Scott,
Yeah.
the people listening, they want to know if the Greenbrier is going to help the Browns,
I
not
know.
where you have
Well,
to
you
go to
asked
the
if you asked if I was excited
bathroom
about
and
it. So
work.
I'm telling, I know you asked if I was excited. I'm answering if I'm excited about going to the Green Bay. But no,
That's true. Poor question. You're right. That is on me. You're right. All right. Let me
but
rephrase the question.
yeah,
Should
should the
Browns
Browns
fans be
fans?
excited they're going
Yeah,
back to the Greenbrier?
yeah, okay, that's a better question, John. Here's what I think, that it turned out to be such a positive experience last year that it makes sense for them to go back. And Kevin Stefanski wanted the team to bond, and he thought that was going to be a great way to do it, is put them in the middle of nowhere and make them bond. And it worked. And I can't tell you how many times during the season, unprompted, a player would say, well, we're handling this adversity because we came together at the Greenbrier. We're able to win games without Nick Chubb, without Deshaun Watson, because we're closer after the Greenbrier. And to me, that was proof and evidence of why it was a good decision. And, my lead to the story today was don't mess with success. So if it worked last year, right, and they won 11 games, I know how the season ended, but they still won 11 games. Why not go back? Now, it's expensive, and it's a hassle for your logistics company or group, and I'm not sure all the players like being away from home for 10 days, but it helped the team chemistry, which was a problem in 2022 and was a strength in 2023. So to me, it makes sense, and I don't blame Kevin Stefanski at all for trying to replicate the formula that worked last year. I do
All
think
right,
one more point real
go
quick.
ahead.
I do think the fans miss out, right? Because I think it's 8 practices that fans in Berea won't get to see. And I think that's sad for the fans in Berea. And I was a little surprised last year, Chud, that there wasn't the backlash, and maybe I missed it, but I didn't feel a lot of that. But I wonder if there'll be more of it this year, because there should be more excitement, because the Browns are coming off 11-6, right? There should be a ton of excitement when we get to training camp. And then for it to start at the Greenbrier before the fans get to view the team at home, I think that's the only negative. And I wonder if fans will be okay with that.
Well, I think that at the end of the day, fans want wins. They want this team in the playoffs. They want to win a division.
Yeah.
So, but you're right, though. Berea, we've always talked in the past how the draft is the Browns Super Bowl. And then, so many people are into, I guess, here's what I'm going to say. Following, to support your point, following the Browns is more than just Sundays. It's
Right.
The draft. It's tailgating. It's Berea and training camp. There's so much that goes into it. But anyway, last thing for me is the NFL survey of players done by the NFLPA. And correct me if I'm wrong, but the Browns came in 23rd in the survey, and Stefanski, the coach of the year, was 28th.
Yes, he got it. I don't know about I think you're right about 28. And the 23rd for sure, and he got a B-, right? And if you read, it's a big long study, and there's a bunch of J.C. Tretter gave his insight. He said pay more attention to the grades than the rankings was one of the things in there. So let's just look at B-. Let's start with Kevin Stefanski, B-. That feels too low to me, right? I mean, you don't hear players complaining about him. They go 11-6. He's coach of the year for the second time. B- felt low. And the comment was 70% of the players thought he didn't make the best use of their time. And that probably means too many meetings. The days are too long, right? We're sitting around when we shouldn't be sitting around. I mean, that's what I take from that. So it's interesting, right? And Jimmy Haslam gets a B, ownership gets a B, yet they complain about the size of the locker room and they complain about the weight room. So I just kind of found that a juxtaposition there. I thought it was interesting. Stefanski got asked about it, and he said, hey, I have an open door policy. I feel good about it. I feel good that players can come to me with their complaints. And I said, well, did anybody ever complain about this to you last year? And he goes, no. I said, have you heard about these issues before? And he said, no. So it's interesting. Is it it's an interesting survey, and I think there's value to it, right? There's a lot of players responded to this. Did you catch them on a bad day, right? When they fill this out, was it after a loss? Was it after a bad meeting? Like, you just don't know those kinds of things. I don't think there's a problem. I don't think the team overall has a problem with Kevin Stefanski. Maybe the way the survey was written, it led to the lower grade. I don't know, but it's certainly interesting. The fact that they were 23rd, that's a drop in 2 spots from the year before. I think the Browns will try to improve in those areas. I think they listen to this. But there's a ton of nuggets in there, Chud. Did you go pretty deep in it at all? Did you look into it?
I did not go deep. Okay. I saw the numbers that I just gave to you, and then I saw that you tweeted whatever you put out there. I saw with some grades.
Yeah.
And that's about as much as I did. I read maybe an article on it.
Yeah, I mean, like across the league, Andy Reid was number 1 with the Chiefs for coaches. Josh McDaniels, who got fired in Vegas, was last. The Dolphins and Vikings were 1-2.
And I noticed the Chiefs came in last.
Well, they came in 31st. It was the Chiefs and Commanders,
or
right?
Last.
Yeah. And the Chiefs owner was last. And the Chiefs owner was last. Yeah. And, and I guess he promised to improve stuff and he didn't. And then he blamed it on the fact that the playoffs go too long. Right? There's not enough time. So, okay, they win the Super Bowl. That's not an excuse to not fix stuff, right? But, I guess it shows you that there's not a correlation between winning and these rankings. Obviously, the Chiefs just won another Super Bowl. But it's interesting. And then it's little tidbits that, I mean, I'm out there every day, right? But I don't necessarily know if I think of this. I know I don't think of these things on a daily basis. I know the weight room's an issue, and during COVID they moved it into the field house. Now they're going to build a new weight room, so they're going to try to answer that problem, because that was one of the big things that the players complained about, and I think rightfully so. Like, it's just out in open space in the field house. It's kind of crammed. It takes up 15 yards of the field house. So I think it's a good idea to build a new weight room. The locker room, they complain about the size of the locker room. There's not a whole lot of space for them to go with that, right? They only have, the building is limited. It's how big it is. And the bigger practice squad is tight in the locker room, right? I think there might be 8 or 10 more guys on the practice squad than there used to be. So that's, 8 or 10 big bodies jammed into this, this space. So those are 2 of the bigger issues, or bigger complaints. And understandable, and they're trying to fix at least one of those. But then there's stuff like there's no family meetup area at the stadium for games. They have daycare, but when you meet your family, right? The players have all the family, attend the games, and there's a lot of them. The meetup is like in a tent in a parking lot, and the players don't like that. The players don't like the fact that when the night before games, they have a roommate in their hotel. And there's not a lot of teams that do that, right? So obviously it's a way to save money by doubling up, but the players don't like that. So that's part of this survey, right? And there's a lot of that. The quality of the food. Do you have enough physical therapists? And the players said no, that they think there should be more. They like the training staff, but they thought there should be more of the training staff, right? So it's kind of like human stuff like that. That. There's a complaint that early in the season, if you got carted off with an injury, they didn't let you call your family to give them an update. And I think they changed that as the year went on. So it's kind of this human level of things. It's kind of the stuff you complain about at your work, right? The food blows or stinks. The vending machines aren't any good, right? Like stuff like that. Just on a much bigger scale with, an NFL team. So I thought the kind of nuances were kind of interesting.
Did you say that the players share a room on the road? Yeah. That would kind of annoy me. I think when I think I would probably want my own room. But
I guess there's a team. I don't know if it's Tampa. One of the teams charges players, and I think it was for $1,750. You could opt out of that and get your own room for the whole year. Which and it's interesting because these teams are all billion-dollar teams, right? I don't know what the Browns are, $2 or $3 billion, and they're valued at now. So it kind of feels nickel and dimey to me, right? Well, why not just get all these guys rooms? but maybe that's not practical. Maybe that adds up to,
Yeah, it does.
It obviously does add up, right? And all these things. And, the Hasms have never been ones not to spend money. The fact that they have the salary cap flexibility, to bring it back to an earlier point, is because the Hasms aren't afraid to spend the cash up front, right? When you transfer the salary to bonus, it's a big check right now as opposed to a big check over 18 weeks, right? And don't hesitate to do that. To go to the Greenbrier costs, it's got to be over $1 million. I don't know how many millions, right? At least $1 million. And they do that because they think it helps the team and it benefits the team. So it's just interesting kind of where you draw those lines,
Mm-hmm. Yep. Well, Scott, I've told you this before in this podcast. I spent a couple years traveling with the team when I did the sidelines when Channel 3 had the preseason games. And but I'll tell you, they're treated well on the road. There's no doubt about it. I was just like, oh my gosh, this is how you travel in the NFL. What an experience that was. But anyway,
there's also, there's complaints that they didn't have enough room on the plane. And
oh, really?
Yeah, and I was talking to some people about it. A lot of the veterans sit in first class. So I don't know how you alleviate that, right? Everybody can't have their own plane, I think it's just some things you have to deal with, and it's just common complaints that show up in this, survey.
Yeah. I just saw on the Greenbrier report card, I was just filing through there, and I see Petrak F.
That's too harsh. There's a lot of good media bonding. I played 27 holes of golf, not at the Greenbrier, but in West Virginia. I ate a lot of good food, drank a lot of beer. I'm just saying, it's a long time to be in the middle of West Virginia.
All right, C-.
There you go.
All right, well, that's it for me, unless I missed something, or do you have anything else?
No, I think we covered it, Chud. I really do. I'm trying to run through my head just like the headlines that I wrote. And we'll talk about it for agency, but the other headline I had, we'll talk about next week when we talk about free agency. They could be less aggressive this year because of where the roster is than in the past. We'll have to see that play out, but I just kind of feel like that. Not that they won't do anything day one, but they've made some pretty big splashes, trades or signing guys, and it might not be as not newsworthy, but it might not be as the headlines might not be as big. There might not be as much flourish a couple weeks from now.
All right. Well, we'll see.
Yeah. All right, Chud, I appreciate it, buddy, as always. And so free agency, March 11th is that first day where they can really reach those agreements, right? That 2-day negotiating period. So we'll do a podcast next week. We'll talk about free agency. We'll see if there's any updates, right? If they re-sign anybody, does Flacco hit the market, which I would expect him to, but we'll see. I think the Browns are going to meet with his agent in Indianapolis this week. So we'll get into all that. We'll get into maybe a couple of names the Browns could chase in free agency next week. But yeah, this has been another episode of the Zone Coverage Podcast. You can read all my work at brownszone.com. Thanks for listening.